What's up guys, Blade Master here, going to be bringing you round 1 game 2 between JohannesVB and Sunsindiary. Now you guys might be wondering why I'm bringing you a round 1 match when I'm in the middle of casting round 3 matches of the Unit Band Beta tournament, and that is for two reasons. The first reason is that this game has already been covered by me on this channel as a live stream, which I may link in, maybe check the top right of your video now. But the second reason is that I wanted to cover this game a bit more in depth after having, a second more closer look at it. Because really, this is one of those games that is just so incredibly high level and so close, and features one of the most special moves that I've seen, one of the most special uses of a unit that I've seen after casting so many Total War Rome 2 games, having invested over 1,000 hours in the game, that it warranted a post-com, a sort of closer look at this game, at this particular matchup between these two players. But before we go into the actual match, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the sort of backstory behind the second game. The first game was posted on my channel. It was a fair bit controversial. Now, it definitely garnered a fair few more dislikes than I usually see on my videos, and I don't, I don't mind that at all. It was a controversial decision taken by me as the judge, jury, and executioner of this tournament, as the person who created it. But basically, in the first game, Sunsindiary took a step faction, and JohannesVB countered it with a non-step faction. And in my opinion, what constituted a legal move by Sunsindiary in pulling through with his cavalry against units that were already shot down, or sorry, charged down, was sort of frowned upon by, was challenged by JohannesVB and frowned upon by quite a few people who watch my channel. But that is, so there is a fair bit of, let's call it bad blood between, or bitter enmity between these two players, because both of them are very good players, and both of them know that the other player is a very strong player in the game and wants to win, the tournament, and wants to defeat this rather good opponent that each of them is facing. So that's the backstory of this game. Now, JohannesVB has taken a step faction. He's the one who took the non-step faction in the first game. He's taken a step faction in this, and Sunsindiary has countered with a non-step faction. Specifically, JohannesVB has taken Massagetae, and Sunsindiary has taken Rome. Now, with the two factions come two bans for each faction. Rome, it was Massagetae's turn as the first faction and map choice. It was Sunsindiary's choice to pick the faction and map first. He decided to pick Rome because, again, he respects his opponent, decided to pick a strong faction despite it being the first round. And he went with Rome, and he went with Rugion. Now, Rugion is... I personally would have picked Alexandria with Rome, but giving access to Rugion for JohannesVB has allowed him to pick, Massagetae. And he decided to ban the two units for the Romans that would almost completely cripple them in facing up against a step faction, namely Triarii and auxiliary Balearic Slingers. Now let's talk about why those two bans are so crucial. Balearic Slingers, unlike Syrian archers, not only have a much quicker reload rate, but they also fire in a much lower arc. The slingshots go in a lower arc, making it harder for horse archers to have the missile baiting strategy that every step player has to use in order to win a game, basically. So banning the access to Balearic Slingers removes the only slinger option that Rome has, thereby removing the most viable anti-horse archer unit that they have. Remember, Rome, of course, doesn't have precursor javelins on basically all of its spear units. It does have them on the legionary cohort and all of its sword units, which sort of forces Rome to bring sword units, which will not do well against powerful nomadic shock cavalry in the first place. The other ban was Triarii. Triarii are the most cost-effective, arguably the most cost-effective spear unit in dealing up against cavalry, purely because of their extreme tankiness, despite coming at a relatively low cost of something around 800. They have elite statistics in almost every aspect, including their armor. Maybe they have 65 morale instead of 70, but besides that, absolutely beastly units. Sunsindiary, on the other hand, has banned the Steppe Noble Lancers and the Saka Cataphracts. Now, you guys, anyone who's watched my recent videos will probably know why I don't think this is the most optimal move by Sunsindiary. The Saka Cataphracts and Steppe Noble Lancers form such an incredibly deadly duo that it almost necessitates one to ban both of them at the same time if they have the chance. After all, the Saka Cataphracts and the Steppe Noble Armored Lancers have that deadly combo of Draco in the Saka Noble Armored Lancers, which removes bracing for any unit that they charge into, and then the Saka Cataphracts have access to Trample, which boosts their already incredibly elite level charge bonus to something fearsome, something truly fearsome. So, creating this 1-2 punch of removing bracing on any unit that the Saka Cataphract is about to charge in, and then popping Trample on the Saka Cataphracts would almost one-shot any unit that's below the price of, let's say, 600 to 700 talents. So in that sense, a suboptimal set of bans by Sunsindiary. Let's see what happens. As for the army composition, we can see that instead of going for purely quality, JohannesVB has opted for a more quantity over quality approach with his nomadic army. You can see small pockets of 2 or 3 lancers, just moving around everywhere, posing a constant threat for Sunsindiary and the Romans. The problem is there are bound to be little gaps that the Romans may be able to utilize, but it just depends on how exactly they can do it. And I apologize for the profuse amount of pausing that I'm doing in this game. It's just that I really need to talk about a lot of stuff that's going to happen in this game. So this is probably going to be an incredibly long video, so I truly apologize. So we can see a lot of Steppe Armored Lancers, and we can see a lot of cheap Steppe Lancers who are around 300 talents and won't really cause much damage to Legionary Cohort, but they can fulfill the just as critical role of removing all the Pila of, or basically sacrificing themselves by charging into the front of Legionary Cohort and then removing them off their Pila, which would then allow the secondary charge from the more powerful Steppe Armored Lancers and the incredibly powerful Saka Noble Armored Lancers to basically decimate a Roman cohort without suffering any casualties themselves. Of course, the only chance that Legionary Cohort and basically any unit in this army, any foot unit in this army of the Romans has of causing any chance of them damaging the Saka Noble Armored Lancers is by throwing their javelins. They will not do anything. They will not be able to hold a candle to the powerful shock cavalry that the Massagetae can field once their javelins have been dropped. Now, one thing that we can see Sunsindiary do is chase off a lot of these horse archers, and the only reason he's able to chase off a lot of these horse archers is because he's brought a really large amount of cavalry. In fact, this is probably the most numerous amount of cavalry that I've seen being brought by a Roman army in 3 or 4 months of watching Rome 2 battles. Maybe the only time I've seen it is by someone who is very new to the game and who doesn't realize that the strength of Rome is in its incredibly tanky infantry. Their cavalry, while somewhat cost effective, is not nearly is not ever going to be the thing that wins them the game, let alone against a Steppe faction whose cavalry outranks the Roman cavalry not only in number but in terms of quality by a huge amount. You can see that the mercenary Amazonian riders are being chased away Fire at Will was turned off here. JohannesVB is using a tactic that is very common among high-level players when using nomad factions, in that they turn off Fire at Will, willing to conserve their ammo for the late game, where archers and arrows against already weakened targets by previous shock charges will be absolutely deadly. Auxiliary cavalry here, they are chasing away armored horse archers. They have 70 armor. They have a decent missile block chance, to be quite honest, I believe. So they, and they have a decent fair amount of hit points too. So they won't be taking too many casualties, but they will be weakened. The reason why I think Sunsindiary has brought so many cavalry units in the first place is because he needs one thing that none of the Roman units have. He needs maneuverability. And that is one thing, that's something that only Roman cavalry can provide. As you can see, even the cheap auxiliary infantry are heavy in mass. By being heavy in mass, they are weighed down by their armor, and they cannot chase after retreating. Even the most exhausted heavy shock cavalry that the Massagetae can field can run away from any of these Roman units, because the Roman units themselves are very well armored. This isn't like a Suebi or a Boii army where you have 210 talent levy freemen whom you can just easily throw away and use their light mass and the fact that they're not encumbered by armor to just chase away and throw away their javelins at retreating enemy cavalry. So to make up for their lack of maneuverability, and possibly because he just had a lot of funds available, Sunsindiary has decided to bring a lot of cavalry. You can see he's brought a mix of auxiliary cavalry and Saka equites. Saka equites and auxiliary cavalry both have 15 bonus versus cavalry, which is going to be critical, because once a shock cavalry charges in, the best way to counter the fact that they're going to decimate your foot units is by issuing an attack order with your melee cavalry. And since a shock cavalry unit cannot stay in a fight, because they, as you can see, they don't have these guys, since they are nomadic shock cavalry units, they actually have fairly decent melee attack. But you definitely don't want to let your shock cavalry stay in a fight for too long, because that is not how their usefulness is capitalized. Their usefulness is capitalized by their huge amount of charge bonus. So you're going to want to charge them in and then pull them out. While they're pulling out, though, you can use Saka equites or any cavalry for that matter to chase after them, and that's really where this 15 bonus versus large is going to apply. You can see some of the armored horse archers firing into a Saka equites. The fact that there are no, that he cannot bring more than 5 or 6 auxiliary infantry or 6 cheap spears in this case is really hurting. Sunsindiary. There are gaps that are being presented in his line all the time. He cannot afford to create a pure box and turtle up with his army. He is forced to stagger his army, because he needs to, on the one hand, he needs the legionary cohort to not get charged at, because he needs them to fire their javelins, their pila. On the other hand, that means his auxiliary infantry, who themselves have a decent bonus versus large, need to be sacrificed so that they prevent the more expensive, the more valuable legionary cohort from being charged at. So that's why he staggered his army. If he kept his army in one line like this and just a perfect circle, one charge from all directions by the Massagetae would severely weaken them. And the fact that there are so many Massagetae shock cavalry on the field means that a second charge would be imminent, and that second charge would decimate a Roman line. So we can see that there's been a fair amount of movement on both sides. Sunsindiary has not stuck to one area. He's moved around, and in hindsight, I think this is also a very good strategy. While I was actually watching this, I think if I recall correctly, I was fairly confused as to why he kept moving and sort of tiring away his units. And I think that's because he doesn't want his army, if his army was static, it would be that much easier for JohannesVB to use his highly mobile army to encircle them that much quicker. And here we can see the first charge of the game, Steppe Lancers getting a pretty decent charge into the flanks of auxiliary infantry. And here you can see again Steppe Lancers absorbing those pila, dying very quickly to legionary cohort. But that allows the Saka noble armored lancers to get a rather uninterrupted charge on legionary cohort. although this was sort of dampened by the fact that they were charging through their own units. Here, Steppe Armored Lancers, who themselves are only at 550 talents, a fair bit cheaper than the 700 talent Legionary cohort, going to get a charge in. That charge is going to be rather nullified by the fact that they're charging in the forest. And here again is going to be where I just told you guys, the Saka Equites, or the Auxiliary Cavalry in this case, going to catch the Saka Noble Armored Lancer General, which makes it much harder, that much harder for the Saka Noble, or any Shock Cavalry for that matter, to pull away. Saka Equites barely managing to get a charge in against Steppe Armored Lancers, and meanwhile the Armored Horse Archers are just going to pour in, they're going to rain in fire. You can see Draco being popped here, which removes the bonus versus large from 20 down to 10. But one of the Saka Noble Armored Lancer at basically the start of the game has died for JohannesVB. 18 men left. Terrible outcome for that early engagement there. And his general as well at 57 men is not looking good, because they've already been caught by the Auxiliary Cavalry. So that's where the maneuverability has come into play. Only 4 kills, but you can be sure that that Auxiliary Cavalry has definitely done a lot of HP damage on these guys. But you can see the mayhem, the sheer mayhem, that even this wasn't even the most coordinated charge, and sort of you know, uncoordinated charge from the Massagetae has caused among the Roman ranks. The Steppe Armored Lancers have destroyed an Auxiliary Cavalry infantry. The Saka Equites also got charged at. And you can see a lot of Roman wavering all across the board. One of the Saka Noble has died. The general, though, critically has come out alive from that engagement. And here the general, a full-strength general, has gotten charged at by the Steppe Lancers. But the Steppe Lancers, because they are not very good units at the end of the day, have got critical 4 kills on the general and bodyguard, but it's not enough to one-shot him, basically. So here the Steppe Lancers are going to die. That is not really a big concern because of the huge amount of units that Massagetae is fielding right now. The Saka Noble Armored Lancers are the ones that are really going to put the hurt on a Roman army. And one of them has done decently. He's brought a total of 3. There is the other one over here, and this is a very interesting move here by JohannesVB. He's going to pull away his Saka Noble Armored Lancer. He sees this Saka Equites that is chasing after his general, so he decides to charge in with a second Saka Noble Armored Lancer behind it that he kept in reserve, just so that he can pin down the chasing Legionary cohort and the chasing Saka Equites, and also gain a very strong charge in the process. So let's try and see if my predictions are right. He does catch both of them. He doesn't do too much damage though. So, but all in all, that is a very necessary move for him. If he had a cheaper Lancer, he would have definitely used it, but he needed to protect his general at all costs. Now you can see the Auxiliary Syrian Archers, who have basically been a non-factor in this game so far. They have been caught by some Steppe Armored Lancers, but they are going to make their presence felt now. Massive gaps in the Roman line, which cannot be exploited because this gap is filled with Horse Archers, and he needs to preserve his Horse Archers, and that's why he cannot engage the Auxiliary Syrian Archers. Ammo left at the end of the game will be so incredibly critical. The Saka Noble Armored Lancer have gotten a single XP chevron. They've done a decent bit of damage. And here we can see panic starting to set in among Sunsindiary and his Roman ranks, and the Roman units are just running away, chasing away, helter-skelter, and that is exactly what the Steppe tribes want. You don't want to face a cohesive line of defensive units. You want them to separate. You want them to panic from the first coordinated charge, or rather divisive charge from, in this case, but chase after and then lose formation that way, and then pick them apart with your arrows. You can see the mercenary Amazonian riders just fleeing away, getting good kills on the Saka Equites, doing decent damage. Armored Horse Archers with 48, 73 kills. The Horse Archer kills are starting to rack up now, but Auxiliary Syrian Archers still remain a threat. And at this point, it's probably good to take a breather and see and recalculate how many units remain, and if the balance of power has somewhat changed between these two players. As you can see, there's still a fair bit left in this game, so this is going to be a marathon of a video. Armored Horse Archers and Steppe Horse Archers are aplenty for Massagetae. You can see a couple of them here. Some Steppe Armored Lancers still remain, despite being very depleted. And a full-strength mercenary Amazonian rider is creeping up behind the Roman line. The general and bodyguard for Rome is down to 22 men. We can see only 2 or 3 legionary cohort which are pretty depleted, but two of them are at full strength critically. An auxiliary infantry at full strength, another auxiliary infantry at full strength, but most of the maneuverability has been taken out for Rome. But I'll tell you why that's not that much of a problem for Rome, because the biggest units that the biggest threats to them have basically been taken care of. 2 massive threats still remain in the 2 Saka Noble Armored Lancer, but he's removed almost all of the all of the mid-tier and low-tier shock cavalry units that can cause such panic by getting coordinated rear charges. So basically, the fact that the point of bringing this much quantity of cavalry for JohannesVB, who's the Steppe player, has sort of been nullified by the increased amounts of auxiliary and Saka equities brought by Sunsindiary. So in that sense, it is a massive risk, but it is a risk that essentially paid off. He has lost a ton of units though. He has 1 auxiliary cavalry at 45 and 2 Saka equities at 20 left. I think, in hindsight, that Johannes was a bit impatient in charging in, but I think that's what moving around and not creating a static box that Sunsin helped Sunsin out over there. He started off somewhere here with his Roman army. He slowly but steadily moved around and around and around, just not letting the Steppe factions see one position as static, and then didn't allow the Steppe factions to encircle it that way. He kept moving around, and that forced the Steppe factions to keep changing their plans and keep maneuvering themselves, and that in the end I think made JohannesVB a bit impatient and then charge in with not a coordinated charge. The perfect scenario for a Steppe faction would be to completely encircle your opponent. He absolutely didn't encircle his opponent here. He in fact just got a half crescent that you see him make later on in this video as well, and be content with a half crescent charge, which is again suboptimal. But against an incredibly suboptimal army brought by Rome, because I mean this is the best army I think that Rome could field under the circumstances, it is still not an army that should face up against a Steppe faction. Mercenary Amazonian riders were creeping up, but Sunsindiary sees the threat and moves around his auxiliary Syrian archers. Keeping his general protected is... Now, Rome has all sorts of disciplined units. Disciplined units don't take as much of a morale hit if your general dies, but considering the odds that are stacked up against them, and considering the fact that there are around 6 or 7 units that can pour both whistling shot and flaming shot, which can stack up and create a huge morale debuff or morale penalty at the enemy units, keeping the general protected is going to be of #1 absolute priority for Sunsindiary. The Roman units being disciplined doesn't matter, I wouldn't give a single shit if the Roman units are disciplined. I would want to keep my general alive as much as possible, because the Massagetae, the Steppe factions are scary. They're scary as hell. One charge mixed with flaming and whistling shot, especially right after the general dies, or anytime after the general dies, will make all of these Roman units turn tail. They don't have a single unit that has encourage or that provides the encourage morale buff to their supporting units, so they don't even have that going on for them. That's why you see he's kept front and center, where there are the fewest amount, or where there are no horse archers that are present. The horse archers are over here. He pulls his general over there. Now you can see Sunsindiary is trying to chase away some of these armored horse archers, and the fact that you can see he wasted a crucial Pila volley there with a full string. That is 120 javelins that he just wasted because the armored horse archer quickly pulled away. That is again very well done. Those are the little moves that most people don't fail to see, but that can basically change the outcome of a game. 120 javelins fired into the enemy general, for example, would reduce this already damaged Saka Noble Armored Lancer to 1/3 of its strength. That could very easily happen. So on top of the excellent missile block chance that the legionaries and that the Romans in general have, which is at around 50%, they have the option to pop attacking testudo. And at this angle, where the arrows are going to be fired into their shields, they are not going to take any damage from the mercenary Amazonian riders, I believe, or the armored horse archers. But that does allow them. That allows these. Did they? I don't even know what happened here. He decides to go. Johannes decides to go for a suicide charge with one of his mercenary Amazonian riders. Probably finished all of his ammo with them, and decided to get a charge in on the auxiliary Syrian archers and get some kills. But the auxiliary Syrian archers are well armored, they are relatively well disciplined, and they have relatively high health, so they won't do, that sort of charge won't do at all. Armored horse archers made their way in close to the Roman army, decided to pull away, making the archers waste a couple more volleys of their ammunition. Again, you can see, like I said, a half crescent. But a half crescent over here makes more sense because he doesn't have the numbers in cavalry to make a full encircle without leaving significant gaps in the army or in the circle. You can see here a very smart move done by Sunsindiary. He's using second wind on this auxiliary Syrian archer, and he used that because the auxiliary Syrian archer, he basically wasted precision shot on the Syrian archer by using it prematurely. Again, the gaps are starting to open up for Rome, and the mercenary Amazonian riders gain an experience chevron by firing into the auxiliary cavalry, removing the oh so crucial maneuverability of the Romans, which has already been severely hampered. But at the same time, you can see the Syrian archers are getting counter shots into the rear of already basically zero armor mercenary Amazonian riders, and he's losing critical ammunition there. JohannesVB is losing ammunition because each horse archer that dies, each horse archer that dies loses all of the ammunition that horse archer carried with it. So every time you lose one horse archer, you lose 1/60th of your ammo, basically. 1/60th of the 10 volleys of ammunition, I believe, that horse archers can field, or 15, I think. 15, yeah. So now it looks like things are coming to a head. It might seem that way, but if you look at the timer, that's probably not the case. But it is going to be a fairly decisive charge. The steppe armored lances get caught by the auxiliary infantry, but now these Legionary cohort are going to get completely hammered by the Saka noble armored lancer. They're just far too few in number to really survive that sort of a charge. The mercenary Amazonian rider, this is another turning point in the battle. The mercenary Amazonian rider decided to charge in, and I can see why he did. Even if there was some ammunition left, which I highly doubt there was, this would be a good move, because if you see the Saka noble armored lancer, how close it is, all it needs to do is charge in, and now that the general and bodyguard is tied down by this horse archer unit, he can afford to charge in to either here or here, and then proceed to charge in and get a second charge on the general and bodyguard. He can afford to do that. He catches 2 units with this one mercenary Amazonian rider. He catches these auxiliary cavalry as well, allowing his Saka noble to get an uninterrupted charge. Pops Draco, removes bracing on all of the units, removes bonus for his cavalry on the spear units and on the cavalry units. But that means that the general doesn't get a second charge. He doesn't get that crucial second charge on the legionary cohort. The steppe armored lancer destroyed the second auxiliary Syrian archer. All the archers are out of the field, and this is the move that I'm going to be talking about in my tactics video. This is the move that changed the game. This is the move that completely changed the outcome of this match. Sunsindiary runs away with his general from where they were at the relative safety of their comrades. He goes to the entire opposite of the map, and I was so surprised because I have never seen this in a total war battle. It is human nature to keep your most prized possession at the center of your army where they're next to safety, but against these odds where a second charge or any other even one more charge by these armored units or these shock cavalry units would basically decimate whatever reinforcements or friends that they had, having the general run away from any sort of reinforcements, not only did it pull away one of these shock cavalry, it meant that they're much safer now because they don't need to be afraid of the Saka noble armored lancer. They're away from all steppe, they're away from all you know, nomadic units. And meanwhile, the Roman army is busy getting decimated. The legionary cohort have done very well here, because that is another thing. The one thing that JohannesVB debated was the fact that pull through is exploitative, and he refused to pull through. He always wanted to pull away, and that just it very rarely works in Rome 2. Shock cavalry just doesn't kill as many units on a charge as it needs to be if you want to make pull away and not pull through work. So now he pops second wind. That is again a very critical move here, because his general and bodyguard gain a significant speed advantage against the exhausted or very tired, in this case, armored horse archer. They just have no chance in hell of catching them, and you can see, you can literally feel the tension is palpable here. Sunsindiary just issuing orders out of his mind, forcing his general to run away. He knows that the entire game is riding on this. He knows how close this is, because he knows that the general has recently died for the nomads, and they have 2 units of armored horse archers. You can see this horse archer also routed at 22 men because the general recently died. That exactly shows you what I'm trying to say. Having a general die creates such panic in the minds of their men that you will see things like this happen. 22 men on an armored horse archer left. They only killed 71 Romans at the end of the day. Didn't pay off for themselves. The mercenary Amazonian riders are still somehow steady, and now the Massagetae face, you know, a mountainous task ahead of them. They have to face a legionary cohort at 77 and a legionary cohort at 74 with auxiliary infantry to support. And the critical thing is, since they've lost all of their Saka noble armored lancers, they don't have any unit or any man that can pop Draco or that can use Draco on the enemy units, which would remove their bracing and their bonus versus cavalry. So they can face up against, or they will face up against, fully braced Roman infantry. Popping a second or a third second wind on his general, second wind on his general, and a third or fourth second wind on his units in general is Sunsindiary. He takes a lot of damage here, but he's still at half strength. He's still with 15 men. The tension is crazy. They take so many shots in, but critically the general is not dead. Casualties are sustained, everyone is concerned, everyone is tired. The legion, because they were defending, the legionary cohort aren't nearly as exhausted as the nomads. You can see these guys are tired and exhausted all across the board. But the Roman legion is not. Still, a charge in with the Steppe armored lances could decimate the auxiliary infantry, and then they can go on to maybe attack the general and bodyguard. But the odds are not in Massagetae's favor. And this, for instance, is a match that I would heavily favor Massagetae over Rome. And very easily could have been won by Massagetae had Sunsindiary not pulled out his general at that critical moment. The legionary cohort, again, these missiles will damage them. As you can see, the mercenary Amazonian riders have done a fair bit of damage against very heavily armored units, but that 50% missile block chance is going to help them out a huge amount there. And let us end this battle by having a rather epic view of I'm just trying to see which is the best unit to get this view on. Let's go on for this armored horse archer, which is approaching and which decides to retreat at the last second against Roman infantry. Their medium mass will really hurt Roman legions at this late game. Armored horse archers have gotten Steppe armored lances have gotten 163 kills on Roman infantry. This legionary cohort was attacked in the rear. He's going to not let the Roman support come in. But this Steppe armored lancer is left far too long in this combat, and they are going to waver and rout. And these legionary cohort will just completely slaughter the mercenary Amazonian riders, and it's basically over. It's over. The Romans have somehow won out against Massagetae. When it seemed like everything was going against them, when it seemed like they were about to lose the game in mid-game, they finally managed to somehow pull it out of the bag and win. Auxiliary infantry are units that I would never expect to get so many kills against, against shock cavalry. But keep in mind that because by going for the quantity over quality tactic that JohannesVB went for here, he brings a lot of much less armored and much more fragile shock cavalry that can get decimated by even cheap, rather weak spear infantry that the Romans can field in the auxiliary infantry, which is why I thought that bringing well, at least, and the other thing that really changed this game was the early death of one of the Saka Noble Armored Lancer. Having that extra Saka Noble at endgame would have caused everyone to rout, I think. But I've talked enough. I've talked for about 35 minutes, I think, on this game. And for those who have managed to bear with me for 35 minutes, wow, props to you. Thank you guys for watching this battle with me. It was a treat to spectate this live, and it's been a treat to watch and commentate on this game again. And hope you all enjoyed it, and stay tuned for more. Peace.